and genetic expression changes in your brain, which happens when people are depressed. And what is it that makes people vulnerable to getting depression? Some years ago, and the vulnerability would be our genetics and our environment. Some years ago, they identified a gene in the human genome that codes for the serotonin transport. When one neuron wants to talk to another neuron, it will release chemicals in a little space called a synapse. And once the chemical is released, the neurotransmitter, one of those neurotransmitters is called serotonin. Once it's released, the neuron that releases it will suck it back up. Little vacuum cleaners called reuptake pumps will pump that back in to repackage and use for another signal. So it's released, sucked back in, and repackaged for another signal. And medicines used for depression, some of the medicines used, will block those pumps, or shut those pumps down. You might have heard of some of those, like fluoxetine, or paroxetine, or sertraline, commonly known as Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, and some of these are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They target those pumps. And some years ago, they identified in the human genome there's a short-arm version of the gene that codes for those pumps and a long-arm version of the gene that codes for those pumps. And they noticed that the short-arm version was a much higher concentration in people with depression, and they thought, we found a gene that codes for depression. If you have the short-arm version, it looks like you're more likely to get depressed. And that was commonly thought for several years until they dug a little more deeply into the research. And by the way, that's what the SS or the SL stands for, the LL stands for short-arm or long-arm version of this gene. Until they dug a little more into the research, what they discovered was that the gene is actually not coding for depression. The gene codes to sensitivity to the environment. If you have the short-arm versions of this gene, you're more sensitive to environmental influences, such that if you're raised in a trauma home, a neglect home, a high-conflict home, a hostility home, then you have higher rates of depression than people with the long-arm version raised in the trauma home, the conflict home, the hostility home. But if you have a loving, nurturing, and supportive home, and you have the short-arm version, you actually don't have more depression, and less depression than people with the long-arm version, and you're more likely to be a leader in society. So it's actually not coding for disease, it's coding for factors that can cause or contribute to depression, making you more sensitive to it. That's what this slide is showing. In this slide, if you're in the blue graph, the blue bars, people who had no traumas or abuse in their childhood or maltreatment. And if you're in the green bar, probably maltreatment. And in the red bar, severe maltreatment in childhood. And the left grouping here is people who have two versions of the long-arm gene. And the middle group is a long-arm version and a short-arm version, one of each. And the right group is the people with two short-arm versions. And you'll notice when you have severe trauma, and you have the short-arm versions, you have much higher rates of depression than if you have severe trauma and the long-arm version. And the people with one of each is in between. But the blue, no trauma, and you'll notice if there's no trauma in the short-arm version, you actually have less depression than people with the long-arm versions. It's not coding for depression, it's coding for sensitivity to the environment. And so when you understand mental disorders, it's most of the time a combination of a variety of genes interacting with the environment, altering brain structure and brain function that leads to the problems. In order to understand depression, we need to understand a couple of brain circuits. I'm going to walk you through a couple. And I use this metaphor of a little red box at the school, you pull and set off the alarm. You all know what I'm talking about? Fire alarm at the school? In our brain, we have an alarm, and it's called our amygdala. Now, if somebody pulls the alarm at the school, it's not only to alert the people in the building, it alerts the emergency operator. And the emergency operator in our brain is our hypothalamus, which is connected to our pituitary gland. So when your alarm fires, it will immediately signal your emergency operator. And the job of the emergency operator, so they're sitting there on their screen, pops up, oh, fire at the school. What's the emergency operator supposed to do? They're supposed to take an action. And they're supposed to call in the emergency responders, right? And so when your alarm fires and alerts your emergency operator, your hypothalamus calls in emergency responders that come from our adrenal glands, adrenaline, and glucocorticoids, your stress hormones. And when the emergency responders arrive at the scene of the fire, there's a fire chief who assesses how big the blaze is, how many responders we have, calls back to the emergency operator and says, hey, even though the alarm is still on your board, you've got enough, you don't need to call anymore. We're good here. In our brain, hippocampal neurons have receptors that register the rise of those stress hormones, and when they saturate those receptors, they'll signal back to your emergency operator, your hypothalamus, and say, hey, we got enough. You don't need to send anymore. And at the school, there's a principal, an administrator, who assesses whether this is a real fire or some kid's playing a prank. And that's the part of your brain where you think behind your forehead called your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And how this might work in your life: one weekend you're walking forward in one of the parks in town and stepping forward in the grass. Now the corner of your eye sees something black and slithery down by your feet. Well, what are you likely to do? Will your alarm fire? Call your emergency operator, call an emergency responders. Your heart rate picks up, your blood pressure picks up, blood is being shunted out of your internal organs into your muscles. You're running 3 steps away and your prefrontal cortex catches up and goes, it's just a rubber hose. Haven't you had something like this happen? Okay, I just taught you a very important brain circuit. One of the jobs of your higher reasoning part of your brain is to assess threats, assess the alarms that fire, and when appropriate, send a calming signal down to turn that alarm off. Many people have difficulty turning off their alarm. They worry, they're chronic worriers, chronically anxious, chronically uneasy. They have ideas that keep this going. When people have depression, these neural circuits get out of balance during depression. When people are depressed, the part of the brain where you reason, think, problem solve, strategize is underactive. So people with depression have a hard time concentrating and focusing and thinking clearly. This part of the brain, called the anterior cingulate cortex, it's the part of the brain where you experience empathy, altruistic love, other-centeredness. It's also where you make choices. When you go, I choose to do this, or I choose to do that. This is the anterior cingulate cortex. And when people are depressed, it's underactive. So people with depression feel emotionally disconnected and are ambivalent. They have a really hard time making decisions. The part of the brain above the orbit of your eye gives you a conviction of wrongdoing, normally. And when people are depressed, this part of the brain is overactive, so they have this sense of guilt, the sense that they're not good enough or not doing things right in the right way. And your alarm circuitry, your amygdala, is overactive in depression. So people with depression have this uneasy, anxious feeling like something bad is pending to happen, but they can't really point out anything. And then the part of your brain called the nucleus accumbens is where you experience pleasure of any kind. When you experience something pleasurable, you're activating your nucleus accumbens. And people who are depressed, this part of the brain is really not responding anymore. So in depression, somebody has difficulty focusing, problem solving, concentrating, paying attention. They have a hard time making decisions or choices. They get overwhelmed really easy. They feel emotionally disconnected. They have a sense of guilt and inadequacy, apprehension and fear and dread that something's going to not go well. And then when something actually does go well in life, there's still no joy. These are how the circuits are when somebody is in a state of depression. Now, when you understand this, anything that moves the neural circuits in this direction, upregulating fear circuitry, interfering with prefrontal cortex circuitry, anything moving the brain circuits that direction will push people toward depression. Does that make sense? Okay? So we look at intrauterine environment, high-stress mothers versus low-stress moms. If a mother is highly stressed while pregnant, her stress hormones will cross the placental barrier, cross the developing blood-brain barrier of the fetus, and alter the braking mechanism in the brain of the child so that they're born with upregulated fear circuitry, and they're less capable of calming their amygdala. So they start out at a starting point more anxious and more irritable, emotionally speaking, in their brain than they would have been had mother not been highly stressed during pregnancy. And what do we mean by highly stressed? Well, a 19-year-old young woman's married and has a first pregnancy, and her husband gets drafted in the military and sent to Iraq with his military unit, and he's in a combat zone. She's going to be stressed during her pregnancy. A young 28-year-old woman, maybe it's her third pregnancy, and her mother is diagnosed with severe late-stage cancer, and she's in the hospital dying. She's going to be highly stressed during pregnancy. A woman who's pregnant, whose husband is violent and hostile and abusive to her during her pregnancy, she's going to be highly stressed during pregnancy. There's lots of reasons people can have stress that have nothing to do with immaturity on the part of the woman who's pregnant. Now, could that be a factor too, that she's just never learned how to cope? That could be a factor too, but it could be lots of factors that bring in stress. If we're chronically and severely stressed during pregnancy, then it raises these corticosteroids, which cross the placental barrier, altering the braking mechanism. So people start out, and these individuals will start out one step toward being more vulnerable to depression later in life. What about the mother's thinking during pregnancy? A study of over 4,000 mothers and their children, followed for 18 years, found that if a mother during her pregnancy had depressogenic, pessimistic, negative patterns of thinking, it increased the risk of her child having depression 18 years later. And after evaluating various potential cofactors that could be involved, the researchers concluded that her negative thinking alone increased the risk of depression by 21%. And it would be the same reasons I'm going to walk you through in a minute that cause depression. But these changing of the corticosteroids, stress hormones, altering brain mechanisms. Regardless of what's happened in utero, once the child is born into life, now childhood environment is going to be playing a role. Now, when children come into the world, they come into the world with hundreds of millions of neurons in their brain more at birth than they have by the time they're 8 years of age. For the first 8 years of life, the brain is busy knocking off millions of neurons. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, I needed those millions of neurons, but the way you should conceptualize this is Michelangelo's block of marble when Michelangelo gets it, and Michelangelo's block of marble when he's done with it. When he's done, he has less marble, but he has a masterpiece. Our brains come into the world prepared to be acted upon by education, environment, experience. Neural circuits which are exercised and used will expand and connect and get stronger. Neural circuits which are not being used get pruned back. This is one of God's design laws. One of the things I'm going to talk about this weekend, for those who haven't followed us online, is that God is the creator, the builder of reality. He builds space, time, energy, matter, life. His laws are the laws upon which reality operates. This is quite distinct from human beings. We can't build reality, so what we do is we make up rules, and then we threaten to punish people who break our rules. This is the core key difference between, if you really ever want to get down to really understand the truth about God and His kingdom, come back to this question. One of the design laws, the law of exertion. If you want something to get stronger, you must exercise it. Because if you don't use it, you'll lose it. Not just physical muscles. You want strong math ability? You've got to work problems. You want strong musical skill? You've got to practice your instrument. You want strong language skills? You've got to speak those languages. You have to exercise those circuits. Because if you don't use them, they will be pruned back. In fact, Albert Einstein, after his death, had his brain biopsied, and they discovered that he had less neurons per cubic centimeter than the average person. But he had significantly more neuron-to-neuron connections than the average person. And those neuron-to-neuron connections form networks for information processing and higher critical reasoning capacity, and the only way you get those networks is by exercising the circuits. It's the law of exertion. Christ talked about that law, by the way, in the parable of the talents, 10, 5, and 1, and the one who buried his talent, what happened to his talent? This was not an imposition by a ruling. It was a metaphor to teach the law of exertion. If you invest your talents and exercise them, you get more abilities. If you bury your talents and don't exercise them, you lose what you have. This is just a design law. So I'm telling you this because when you understand early brain development, regardless of what happened during pregnancy, from this moment forward, once the child is born, then life experiences will begin impacting the developing brain. The brain continues in a state of change. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you are alive, your brain is changing. It never stops changing until you die. So stressful childhood environment versus nurturing environment. 25-year study funded by the National Institute of Mental Health found that family conflict and violence was evaluated, and young people appeared to be more affected by the conflict in the family than by marital disruption, divorce, or separation. In fact, when they looked at mental health outcomes, emotional problems, substance use issues, depression, young people did best. The home that was best was a two-parent home in which there's loving, nurturing, and healthy environment. Love, nurturing, and healthy environment. That's the best home. But the next best home that kids did best in is a single-parent home in which there's good structure, loving, nurturing, and low conflict. The home that did not as well as the single-parent home that's loving and nurturing is a two-parent home that's constantly in conflict and fighting and arguing and hostility. The kids don't do as well in that home. And the worst home of all is a single-parent home where there's constant conflict, arguing, fighting, and hostility. That's the worst of all. Adolescents exposed to ongoing family conflict, arguments, doesn't have to be violence. It can simply be the constant verbal attacks, the cursing, the swearing, the running down, the hostility, just you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't have to be physical violence. Just the negativity and the conflict emotionally going on constantly. Increased suicidal thoughts, depression, emotional behavior problems, drug problems, and PTSD. So anything that increases, that contributes to the imbalance, and maybe I should spell this out. Back up a slide. Maybe I should spell this out. You understand, ongoing conflict in a home activates the brain's alarm circuitry. Think about when you have been in any situation where you're in a conflict situation. Your adrenaline goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, your alarm circuitry goes up. Now, think of the law of exertion. Law of exertion. If you exercise something, what happens? It gets stronger, okay? And so when you're raised in a home where there's ongoing hostility and conflict, then your brain is exercising the fear circuits, and these are, and your amygdala is upgrading. You're becoming more anxious, more fearful, more socially inhibited, more stressed. And you're going to see the cascade of stress on the body in just a moment. And so the brain is changing and pushing young people to more depression as they get older. Unresolved guilt, unforgiveness, and denial. Let's talk about why that is. I'm going to teach you another brain circuit called the salience network. Now, what's salience? Salience means relevance or significance. As sensory information, sight, sound, touch, and so forth, comes into your brain, it will pass through the thalamus on its way to its ultimate cortical destination. Now, as it passes through the thalamus on its way to its ultimate cortical destination, if this sensory information is a threat to you, it will be tagged by your alarm and sent immediately to your thinking circuits of your brain, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, where you think, for you to address the potential threat and make a plan to restore safety and security. How many have the fan blowing in this room? You hear the fan from the projector system or the air conditioning system? You hear that? It's been blowing the entire time. Sound waves have been passing through the atmosphere, hitting your tympanic membrane, activating your acoustic neuron, sending a signal through your salience network, and your salience network said, that's an irrelevant signal, don't pay attention to it, and you weren't even aware of it until I pointed it out to you. It's automated. What would happen if you smelled smoke like the building was on fire smoke right now? Would your salience network let you ignore it? No, it's important, pay attention. Say you're home cooking in the kitchen, you got a cast iron skillet on the stove, and it's cooking, it's hot, you're distracted on the TV or the telephone, and you reach out and you touch the hot skillet with your bare hand. What will happen is that a signal will go up the pain fibers to your spinothalamic pathway, and as it passes through the thalamus, your amygdala will fire and tag that and shoot it up here to where you pay attention, and I promise, wherever your attention was, on the TV or on the telephone, your attention will be irresistibly drawn to your hand. And you have a potential threat. There's a potential threat to your hand, and you make a plan. I got a plan, ice and an oven mitt. That's my plan. As soon as you make your plan, the alarm goes off, and you can calm down again. Okay, do you see how this works? Sometimes, though, this salience network becomes disrupted. When it becomes disrupted at the anterior cingulate cortex, and the signal, the alarm signal, is trying to be sent to your thinking circuits where you need to make a plan, but it's being blocked, and so the brain sends it into the orbital cortex. That's the part above the orbit of your eye. Normal part of this part of your brain is to give you a conviction of wrongdoing and redirect you away from inappropriate things. So if you were to try to stand up in this room right now and take your clothes off in front of the rest of us, your orbital cortex would start firing like crazy. You get real uncomfortable. Don't do it, don't do it. Aren't you glad you have an orbital cortex? And so are the rest of us, right? Okay? Well, when you understand this, Okay, when this happens, then this stress signal, whatever it is that you're not processing, gets sent to the orbital cortex. You get a conviction of wrongdoing, which causes more anxiety and stress, and you get negative ruminating loops going. You ever known people with negative ruminating loops, and they stressed and worried and stressed and worried, and they loop and stress and worry? Now, most people will do this transiently in the aftermath of a major life loss, like the death of a loved one. In the immediate aftermath of a major life loss, people will often go, no, that's too much, no. Which means at the anterior cingulate of the cortex, where you make choices, you're going, no, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to process that. No, I don't want to deal with that. No, too much. But you're still aware of it, and that's still stressful, so where's that being processed? It goes here. And the normal job of the orbital cortex is conviction of wrongdoing. So people will say, which another word for that is feeling guilty, then people will say, it's my fault. If I would have kept them on the phone 10 extra minutes, they wouldn't have been in the intersection when the truck ran the red light. It's my fault. I booked them on that flight. If I would have booked them on a different flight, they wouldn't have been on the one that went down. It's my fault. I knew they were stressed. I knew their girlfriend just broke up with them, but I just worked a double shift and I was so tired. But if I'd have gone over last night and talked to him, he wouldn't have killed himself last night. It's my fault. So what disrupts the salience network? Denial, refusing truth, or believing a lie will disrupt the salience network and get ruminating loops going. Or actually doing wrong to another person, telling lies about somebody, stealing from somebody, committing adultery, doing wrong, and refusing to repent will disrupt the salience network, and people start looping and worrying about getting caught and about the stuff that could happen to them. Or somebody's actually done you wrong. You have been wronged by somebody, and you hold a grudge, and you're resentful. Have you seen the grudge holders that loop? Something was done wrong to them 33 years ago, and they're still looping on it. They're still talking about it. They can't let it go. So what is it that reconnects the salience network? Truth, repentance, and forgiveness will reconnect your salience network. And this is important. Now, what if the amygdala doesn't calm? What if we get these negative ruminating loops going? What if we have this disrupted salience network? What if we can't turn off this alarm, and this alarm, it just keeps firing? We stay looping, we stay stressed, we stay worried, we stay anxious, we stay on the rat wheel of life, and we never let ourselves rest. What happens if we don't turn off this alarm circuit? Well, the alarm circuit will activate your sympathetic nervous system, which will activate your immune system. Why will it activate your immune system? Because the immune system is to your body what the National Guard is to a nation. And the National Guard is to protect the nation from invasion. Your immune system is to protect your body from invasion. If you were in my part of the country, Tennessee, we have black bear in Tennessee. If you were out on an afternoon hike and you came around a trail in a corner and there was a black bear a few feet in front of you, I promise your alarm will fire. And when your alarm fires, it instantly says to your immune system, DEFCON 2, prepare for invasion. Because if you have to wrestle the bear, and there are bite marks and claw marks, there will be these little microscopic invaders, bacteria and viruses trying to invade your body. And so as soon as you activate your alarm circuitry, it tells your immune system, hey, there's a potential threat, prepare for invasion. Now we have two types of immunity. We have acquired immunity, which is what we exploit with a vaccine. You give somebody a vaccine, you give them dead enemy invader. You give somebody a polio vaccine, you're giving polio virus, but they come into your body carrying the flag of their nation. We call that an antigen. And when you give that virus, your immune system says, look at all those invaders from the land of polio. Let's go train some people up at basic training to be snipers to snipe those guys, and we call those antibodies. And if you've had the vaccination, then your body has trained up their little snipers, and you should conceptualize them as a sniper, because the rest of your life, your immune system will scour everything coming into your body and watch very, very meticulously. And if any invader comes in from the land of polio carrying the flag from the nation of polio, then your immune system will see that and snipe and kill that and leave all the other invaders alone. Well, you're on the trail with a bear. So you don't know where the invaders are coming from. You don't have time to train anybody out. So you have another type of immunity. This type of immunity is your innate immunity. This is your macrophages. Now, you should conceptualize this as a home invasion, and you have a sawed-off shotgun under the bed. Now, I have to explain sawed-off shotguns to Australians because you guys don't know about guns. Okay? A shotgun does not have a single bullet. A shotgun has a cartridge with 50 to 100 BBs in it. And when you saw off the barrel, instead of getting a nice closed grouping of the BBs, it allows for a wide scatter shot. So 50 or 100 BBs go bam, you get that whole section over there at once. That's a shotgun. So you've got a home invasion, and you've got a sawed-off shotgun. You hear the invader, you point, you blast, boom! You get the invader, but what just got damaged besides the invader? Your house just got damaged. And in our metaphor, the house is your body. So under chronic looping stress, where you're chronically firing your amygdala, not allowing rest, not decompressing, not turning it off, you kick up your macrophages, which begin releasing inflammatory cytokines. Inflammatory cytokines would be analogous to the BBs in the shotgun. They will actually kill the bacteria and the viruses that are trying to invade. But you don't have bacteria and viruses trying to invade. You're under chronic stress. You're just walking around blowing holes in your house. And so these inflammatory cytokines, they damage insulin receptors, and you develop insulin resistance in the face of elevating glucocorticoids, steroids that tell your body to pump glucose into your bloodstream because you're in fight or flight mode. So you're elevating your glucoses, but now you're developing insulin resistance. This leads to increasing risk of diabetes type 2, obesity, hypercholesterolemia, heart attacks, strokes. Additionally, they interfere with normal synaptic to synaptic signaling. When neurons want to talk to each other, remember, there are these chemicals in that little synaptic space, and there's postsynaptic receptors that will register that signal. But these inflammatory cytokines get in those synaptic spaces and interfere with that signal. If I were to take one syringe full and inject you with these inflammatory cytokines, within a few hours you would start experiencing extreme malaise and fatigue, fogginess, concentration problems, aches and pains all over your body, nausea, loss of appetite, sleep disturbance. And these are the physical symptoms that are often associated with major depression, because during major depression, these inflammatory cascades are going on. Now I'm showing you a synapse. That's actually a picture, a micrograph of a synapse on the left and a graphic of it on the right. And you have a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron. This neuron, these little circles here, are vesicles that are containing some type of a neurotransmitter like serotonin or dopamine or norepinephrine. This dark area here is the synaptic space. So when this neuron would fire, it would release some of that chemical into this space, and there'd be little pumps in there that would suck it back up to repackage. Most of the time when you see this stuff depicted, it's just a presynaptic and postsynaptic neuron. But that's only 2/3 of a synapse. What this one depicts is the other third, which is the astrocyte. And that's really what you need to understand. What is an astrocyte? And if you want to remember what an astrocyte does, an astrocyte, by the way, is a white cell. These are gray cells or neurons. Astrocytes are not neurons. They're the glia, the white cells of the brain. So what does an astrocyte do? If you want to remember, just remember astronaut. Because an astronaut never goes out into space without their spacesuit. And the astroglia are the spacesuit. And what's a spacesuit do for an astronaut? They provide a nice milieu, an environment to keep the astronaut healthy. The astroglia buffer potassium and calcium and make neurotrophins that help keep the neurons healthy. They make a nice milieu that helps keep the neurons healthy. That's the job of the astroglia. This next slide, this is your circulation. Now, you're under chronic worried stress, you got your salience network disrupted, you've got your amygdala activated, your immune system's all geared up, you're inflamed, your body's inflamed, and that inflammatory factors are circulating now in your blood. There is another little white cell in your brain, now this is inside your brain, a little white cell in your brain called a microglia. Now, normally, this cell will take an amino acid that you get from food called tryptophan. Anybody heard of tryptophan? Okay? That's what that stands for, tryptophan, TRP, tryptophan. Normally, it will turn tryptophan, it's a precursor to serotonin. It will turn tryptophan into serotonin. But when we become highly inflamed, you get those inflammatory cytokines, it alters the factories inside your cell. Factories are the genes that are turned on or the genes that are turned off. And the factories that will turn tryptophan into serotonin get turned off. Those genes get shut down, and new genes get turned on that turn tryptophan into quinolinic acid. And quinolinic acid is toxic to astroglia. It begins damaging the astroglia. You're an astronaut out in space, and little micrometeors start hitting your spacesuit, and you start venting atmosphere. You are not a happy astronaut. And so when we get this inflamed state, and we start getting this quinolinic acid building because of the chronic inflammation, then the astroglia become damaged, and instead of buffering the glutamate and the calcium and so forth, they actually kick it up, and this will damage neurons and alter gene expression, and we lose proteins that keep our brains healthy. So when somebody has depression, we have the higher inflammatory state damaging the glia. They stop providing their support. We get neurogenesis, genesis, the creation of neurons. We lose that. We lose the ability to make new neurons. We alter how the DNA is being expressed in the brain. We impair prefrontal cortex, where you think and reason, and you actually have thinning in parts of your brain when you are in a state of depression. This is a functional scan. The scan on the left is a depressed brain. The scan on the right is a non-depressed brain. And they're looking at glucose metabolism in real time, the activity of the brain. And the bright areas mean this is a brain that's really active, burning up a lot of energy. The depressed brain is not having normal activity anymore. That's not stroke. Those cells aren't dead. They're just very, very sluggish. So why do imbalanced brain circuits lead to depression? What's the reason? Because the imbalanced brain circuits kick up your immune system, which increases inflammatory factors. That's what's happening. So unhealthy or imbalanced circuits activate your immune system. The immune system kicks up those inflammatory factors, which makes those changes I just showed you in the glia and the neurons, and that leads to depression. It's the increased inflammation. With that in mind, then, anything that increases inflammation can lead to depression, even when the brain circuits are not out of balance to start with. If we start kicking up inflammation in the body, then we can actually, your microglia will read that inflammation, and they will then start turning tryptophan into quinolinic acid, and that will then damage your astroglia, and you can still lead to these changes of depression because of a highly inflamed state. A study of 9,000 adults examining the amounts of fast food and junk food, such as pizzas, hamburgers, donuts, croissants, candies, cakes, and so forth, found that those who ate junk food had a 40% higher rate of depression than those who did not, because junk food is highly inflammatory food. Any amount of the food increased the risk. It was dose dependent. The more junk food you ate, the higher the risk. It wasn't just that you weren't getting the good micronutrients that you can get in good wholesome food. It was that you were actually increasing the inflammatory factors that cause the cellular changes in the brain of depression. Smoking. Smoking is highly inflammatory. Not only does it give you all the stuff that increases your risk of cancer, but it increases the inflammatory factors and thus increases your risk of depression. Alcohol abuse, same thing. Drug abuse, same thing. Does that surprise anybody? That's a no-brainer. You knew that one. How about type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes? Adult onset diabetes increases your risk of depression 24%, because adult onset diabetes, when you're diabetic, you have high blood sugars. It's already an inflamed state with insulin resistance. But then once you get high blood sugars, your high blood sugars start creating new molecules called advanced glycation end products. It's when glucose binds to other stuff it shouldn't bind to, like hemoglobin, and you get something called hemoglobin A1C. And these new molecules now are very inflammatory, and that's why diabetics get retinopathies, peripheral neuropathies, kidney damage, and so forth, because they're in a highly inflamed state. Chronic pain. Chronic pain increases inflammation because chronic pain activates your alarm circuitry and causes you to be stressed all the time. It interferes with normal sleep, which doesn't allow good resets of things. So it increases the inflammatory cascades. If someone has depression, now after I've gone through all this with you, and we're in a church here tonight, I want you all to think, because you're going to need to help somebody you're going to come across in life is going to need help with this question. If someone has depression, does that mean that depression is sin, they are in sin, or they don't have enough faith? Somebody's going to need your help with this question. I travel all over the world, and I will tell you this is a myth in Christianity. And I've heard so many people hurt by other people within Christianity. It could be lay people, it could be church leaders. I've heard this. Well, if you just had more faith, or you must have some sin in your life. You've heard this kind of thing too? It's a myth. This is a physiological condition. So interventions. What is the number one treatment for depression? What do you think the number one treatment in Western societies are for depression? Antidepressant medications, that's right. How effective do you think they are? And when I say this, how effective? I'm going to give you a cherry-picked population. We're going to look at the common serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressants, and we're going to see how effective they are in treating depression by cherry-picking our population. Here's our population we're going to study. People who this is their first and only episode of depression can get into our study, or people who had recurrent episodes of depression as long as every time they took a medicine, they got well. If they took one medicine and they didn't get well from that medicine, they can't be in our study. You see how we've cherry-picked our population? Okay. Now, with that cherry-picked population, let's say we put 100 people on a medicine called escitalopram, or Lexapro is the common name. It's an SSRI. What percentage of those people, how many do you think will get well out of 100? Or what percentage do you think will get well? 40%. Any other guesses? 10%. Okay, any other? 60%. And the answer is 27.5%. 72.5% do not get well. And then if they switch them to a second antidepressant, okay, they didn't get well on this one, let's try a different antidepressant, 21% get well. And if they didn't get well on the first two and they switch them to a third antidepressant, 16% get well. And if they haven't gotten well on 3 antidepressants, they switch them to a fourth antidepressant, 7% get well, 6.9% get well. And if you look at tolerability issues, had to stop because the side effects are so bad I couldn't stand it. On the first one, that's not really too bad. That's basically 92% of them could tolerate it, so that's not bad. 92% tolerability is pretty good. But 8.5% had to stop. But by the second one, we're already near a quarter. A quarter of people can't tolerate the medicine anymore. It's a third of people. And by the fourth one, it's 41% of people can't tolerate the medicine. And you got a 6% and 6.9% efficacy, good outcome, 41% intolerability. Medications circulate through the body, affect multiple organ systems. That's why they cause the side effects, because they're not just affecting the brain, they're affecting the other systems of the body, and that's where the side effects come from. They can impact fetuses during pregnancy. One study showed that serotonin medicines can alter language development. One called paroxetine or Paxil causes cardiac defects and should not be used. I do put this up here because I think there's a lot of myths about autism out there. There's no evidence at all that antidepressants during pregnancy have any correlation or impact to cause autism. One study did just come out recently, like in the last week or two, that is demonstrating a signal that hypertension of pregnancy, high blood pressure of pregnancy, like eclampsia-type pregnancy, is associated with autism. So something's going on in that altered metabolic state that may be a factor. Haven't traced that out yet. These medicines can be secreted in breast milk, so you have to watch out for that as well. Adolescents exposed to an SSRI in utero had an 8.2% rate of depression by age 15%. Those whose mothers had a mental illness but no SSRI in utero had a 1.9% rate of depression. Does that mean that the medicine contributed to depression? It's hard to know, because we're not told whether the mothers who had the depression on the antidepressant medicine actually had remission. They might have still been. Many patients I see come to me on medicine, but they're not well. So they're on the medicine, but they're still depressed. And so the study doesn't tell us whether they were depression-free. And if you're in a state of depression, how are the brain circuits? You have your upregulated amygdala, right? If you have upregulated amygdala, you have increasing glucocorticoids. You have increasing glucocorticoids, that's a stress state in pregnancy. If you have a stress state in pregnancy, that alters fetal development. So the kids are born with brains upregulated, higher rates of depression. So it's hard to know from studies like this. You have to think through potential other variables. People like real simple things. Oh, boom, boom, like one little simple thing that might give you the answer. It's not usually that simple. And then untreated depression, we do know, also causes quite a bit of problems, including undermining the maternal caregiver, and children whose mothers are depressed after birth have higher rates of depression than children who don't, because they're not getting the early childhood affection and attention and care that they need, and that alters brain development. So when you think about treating depression, the way I think about this, now one of the problems in mental health, I think benefits and problems is like a two-edged sword, is the DSM. Do you know what I mean when I call it the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual? It's how pretty much all mental health disorders are diagnosed. And one of the weaknesses of that is it lends itself to people becoming checklist diagnosticians. You open up the book, you find the criteria, you read what it says, do you have this? And you go check, 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 check. Oh, you've got this disorder. And it really that's not the way to diagnose. But it lends itself to that, and so many people think that, okay, check, 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 and let's say we meet the criteria for depression, and in fact, let's say we actually are going to agree. We do the brain studies and other things, and this brain is depressed. This is physiological depression. You still don't know what's wrong with them because you don't know why they're depressed. You don't know the contributing factors in their life that led to the depression. You know that when someone's depressed, all those physiological things I showed you are going on, but what led to that? Was it because they have a really bad junk food diet and they have multiple nutritional deficiencies as well as a high inflamed state from food? Is it because they have an untreated sleep disorder that will contribute? Is it because they have significant estrogen or testosterone deficiencies or thyroid deficiencies? Is it because they're in a marriage in which they're getting beaten regularly? Is it because they're getting picked on at school and they're being bullied at school and they're under that chronic stress from that? I mean, just because somebody has depression, you don't really still know what's going on with them yet just because of that, do you? And if you don't know that, you don't know how to treat. And so the first thing after you've come to the conclusion, this is depression, then the next thing you have to do, you got to go, what are the contributing factors in this individual's life that have brought them to be in this state? And as many of those as you can identify and intervene on, then the better the outcome you can get. So psychotherapies, what are psychotherapies? These are talk therapies that are designed to activate your prefrontal cortex and your anterior cingulate cortex, which will reconnect salience network and help turn off the alarm circuitry, which will help reduce the inflammatory cascade and take that pressure off. This was an interesting study where they took individuals with depression compared to controls, and the depressed group before and after cognitive therapy. Cognitive therapy is a truth-based therapy. It engages the person to evaluate what they're worried or stressed about, the ruminating loops they have, in light of evidence and truth, and think it through more accurately. And they put them in a scanner, and they looked at their reactivity of their amygdala and their activity of their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or your reason and think, before and after the cognitive therapy. And while they're in the scanner looking at the amygdala activation, they gave them a mild human stressor. This is what they did to them. They showed them the picture of an ugly human face, and they said to them, well, that kind of looks like you, doesn't it? Okay. Well, that was the stressor. And the non-depressed people in the dotted green line, they laughed like you did. That's funny. Okay? But the depressed group, look at that, was very stressful to them. Their amygdala is really activated. And then the bluish line is the depressed group after cognitive therapy. Normalization of their amygdala response after a cognitive therapy. And over here they had them do a digit span. They're saying, take those numbers, put them in order from highest to lowest or lowest to highest. They can do it either way. And if you're doing that, you're activating your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which can be measured on a functional scan. And the control group, nice robust activation of the dotted green line. The gray line is the depressed group, sluggish. And then the kind of aqua line there, normalization of brain function with the truth-based therapy. And what's happening, this is again a law of exertion. They are in the cognitive therapy, interacting with the therapist, exercising their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is requiring them to think and make choices about what they believe, which is exercising their anterior cingulate cortex. And the normal way our brain's designed is the higher cortex, when we reconnect salience network, sends a calming signal down to our amygdala, calming our amygdala and turning that circuitry off. What about social interventions? So one non-pharmaceutical intervention for depression is a good cognitive therapy. What about social interventions? Well, there's a small study, pilot study, looking at 6 lonely individuals compared to 8 socially connected individuals, and they looked at gene expression in their white blood cells. And they found 209 genes expressed differently, either turned on in one group and off in the other, and vice versa. And the genes associated with inflammation were turned on in the socially isolated people, the lonely people, and the ones that fight viruses were turned down in the lonely people. And it was just the opposite in the socially connected people. Understanding again, anything that contributes to inflammation is going to increase our risk of depression. The lonely people may be at more risk. These findings were then confirmed in a separate study of 93 more individuals, and they had the same finding. We are designed for relationship. When we are isolated, it is a high-stress state, kicking up inflammatory cascades, not just through the immune system I walked you through earlier now, but now genetically we're altering how our genes are expressed, turning on genes that promote inflammation. National Institute of Health looking at protective factors in kids and families, and the two big things they found out, these are social things, these are relationship things. The two big things are family member confidant, kids growing up in a home in which they have somebody they can come home and confide in. They can talk about the fact they were teased or made fun of or picked on or bullied at school. They can talk about the fact that the girlfriend broke up with them or the boyfriend broke up with them. They have somebody at home they can talk to and work through the stressors of life with. Think that through. Think how beneficial that would be. As they work that through, they learn how to calm their amygdala. They learn how to problem solve. They learn how to handle life stressors. They develop the higher cortical circuits. They will be less stressed individuals. And the second is family cohesion. Family cohesion is our family supports each other. We watch out for each other. We encourage each other. We have each other's back. We don't make fun of each other. We don't betray each other. We don't tell family secrets out in public. We don't hurt each other. We don't embarrass each other. We have a family that sticks together. Those two factors were significantly important in reducing later onset mental health problems in young people. Socialization, healthy socialization, other relationships. Somatic means physical. Physical interventions to the body. Exercise. When you exercise regularly, you resensitize insulin receptors, which are very good to do. Your metabolism improves, your weight improves, but your body produces something called interleukin 10. Your muscles produce something called interleukin 10, which is a powerful anti-inflammatory cytokine. It reduces all those inflammatory factors that we were releasing earlier from chronic stress. Exercise will repress those or push those down, so we have an anti-inflammatory effect from regular exercise. It also turns on all of the brain's neurotrophins. What are neurotrophins? These are proteins that the brain makes that are like fertilizer for your brain. When your brain is making these, the neurons you have stay healthy. You can actually sprout new connections quicker and faster, so you can learn easier. Your brain will make new neurons in certain brain regions under the influence of these proteins. But when these proteins are not available, we have neuronal volume loss. We don't make neurons as quickly. Sprouting is reduced, and it's harder to learn. Exercise turns on them all. It's the only intervention that turns all of them on. It's a regular exercise. It increases endorphins and enkephalins and dopamine, which are mood elevators and have antidepressant effects. American Journal of Psychiatry article in 2017 of 33,000 people followed for 11 years found that 1 hour per week of leisure time exercise reduced depression by 12%. 12% reduction in 1 hour a week of leisure time exercise. That's not that much. 1 hour a week, leisure time exercise. And when it comes to exercise, there's a whole section in my book, The Aging Brain, on exercise. One of the things they discovered is if you're going to exercise and you want benefit from it, you have to pick an exercise you enjoy. Because if you don't enjoy it, and it's like, oh, I hate this, but my doctor says I've got to do it. Oh, I'm slugging through it. 3 more minutes and I can be done. Okay? If you're doing that, then you're active. It's stressful for you. And if it's stressful for you, what are you activating? You're activating your amygdala. If you're activating your amygdala, what are you kicking up? Your immune system, what you're kicking up inflammatory factors. So you will undermine, and in fact, studies show if you're highly stressed during exercise, you don't get the lowering cholesterol and all the benefits from exercise. So you have to pick an exercise you enjoy. So other studies also show that outdoor exercise has a better effect than indoor exercise. But one study showed you got the same effect from indoor exercise if you're looking at pictures of the outdoor while you're exercising. Because the mind, the way you think, what you perceive is very powerful, has an impact on the body. Lifestyle changes, nutrition. Talk about L-methylfolate. I don't know if it's in the slide coming up or not. This might be repeated, so you might get this twice.
but I want to tell it to you anyway. There's a gene defect in the human genome, a gene that's required for your body to metabolize folic acid from food. Folic acid is B9. It's one of the B vitamins. You find it in fruits, oranges, and other foods will have a lot of this in it. But 50 to 60% of people with depression have this gene defect where they cannot metabolize folic acid found in food into the form the brain needs. When you eat folic acid from food, it cannot go into your brain until your body metabolizes it into its methylated form, the L-methylated form. And once it's methylated, then the transporters that transport it will transport it into the brain. And once it's in the brain, it's required as a cofactor for your brain to make your neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. So consider Wheat-Bix factory makes Wheat-Bix. Trucks move Wheat-Bix around. All of your antidepressant medications do not cause your factories, your brain, to make neurotransmitters. They simply work on the transportation systems, the trucks. The L-methylfolate is like the sugar in flour that you need to make Wheat-Bix. And if you don't have any, the factory shut down, distribution goes down, you get depression, and you give an antidepressant that affects the transporter system. But if you don't have anything to be transported, this is one factor why antidepressants often don't work. For 50 to 60% of people with depression have this gene defect. And so my understanding is that the Medicaid, Medicare, whatever you call it, in Australia does not pay for this test. It's a simple test. It's a gene test, doesn't pay for it. So you have to pay for it yourself. The other solution is simply take L-methylfolate supplements, just to make sure that if you're taking a vitamin, it's got methylated folate in it. And there's no harm. The people without the gene defect, their bodies can use the methylated folate just as well as the other person, but the people with the gene defect can only use the methylated folate. So you can simply just take the L-methylfolate over the counter. The other thing you need to know is if you are on L-methylfolate and you're taking any other vitamin that has unmetabolized folic acid, and we'll say folate or folic acid, that's unmetabolized, it has a tighter binding affinity to the transporter that will transport the L-methylfolate into your brain and will block the L-methylfolate from getting in your brain. So you really don't want to be on the unmetabolized form of folic acid supplementation if you have the gene defect. Omega-3 fatty acids. 70% of the fat in your brain is made from omega-3 fatty acids, DHA, EPA. These are long-chain oils that come from things like salmon, mackerel, sardines. It's the oily fish. The short-chain form you can get, which is called ALA, you can get in flax and chia seed, but your body only converts about 1% of that into what the brain needs. Vitamin D is associated with depression. If you have low vitamin D levels, then you have higher rates of depression. This is something you simply have to have your doctor measure. There's no really whether you have to do a blood test on this. You may think we live in a sunny country, we probably don't have to worry about that. But most people work indoors these days, and even if you live in a sunny country, you're not getting sun. I live in Tennessee, sunshine, one of the southern states in the U.S., and 70% of the people in my city are vitamin D deficient. And if you have vitamin Ds below 25, it increases all causes of mortality as well, and increases and doubles your rate of Alzheimer's dementia. So it's something simple to do. Get your doctor to check it. Don't just jack up on vitamin D, because if you get a vitamin D level over 140, that increases all causes of mortality. So you really want to get it checked and then be guided in how you get your vitamin D supplementation. Avoid junk food and eat a healthy diet. The healthiest diets for brain volume and brain function are the two that have been repeatedly demonstrated in multiple studies are either the Mediterranean diet, high in omega-3 fish oil, or the whole food plant-based diet, the vegan diet with fruits, nuts, grains, vegetables, a whole food plant-based diet. Those are the two healthiest diets for the brain. Sleep. And I can't remember if I have a slide on sleep, so I'll talk about sleep now. I might have another. Oh, I do, there. Ha-ha. So obstructive sleep apnea. Obstructive sleep apnea, when you fall asleep, the soft tissues in the back of your throat will cover your windpipe, And as your diaphragm tries to move air, your oxygen levels fall because your windpipe is covered. And as they get to a certain threshold, your brainstem alarm goes off. I'm suffocating, I'm suffocating. So you wake up just enough to tighten the musculature in the back of your throat where you get some air and the oxygen level goes up and you're in and out of stage 1 sleep all night. You don't get the restorative stages of sleep. So people with untreated obstructive sleep apnea have higher rates of depression and have loss of gray matter in their brain. The good news is those reverse with treatment. And you can treat it with a positive airway pressure machine your doctor can prescribe if they diagnose you with this. Something you should know about. Sleep disorders double the risk of depression. And it's during sleep, your brain is highly metabolic. It's 2 to 3%, it's 2 to 3% of your body mass, but it uses 20% of your body's energy. So it's burning up a lot of fuel, which has a lot of byproducts of that metabolism, which need to be cleared. It's during sleep that the cells will contract and expel out of the inside of the brain cells the byproducts of metabolism into your cerebral spinal fluid to be cleared out of your brain. If you don't get normal sleep, chronically, not on a single night or like maybe you're jet lagged because you went to Australia or something, okay? But if it's a chronic sleep deprivation, then your brain will not clear these, and you will build up slowly over the years, and it increases your risk of dementia and mood disorders as you age. Now, I think I'll take a minute and tell you about normal sleep, because as I've traveled around, it's astounding how many people don't know what normal sleep is. Most people, I found, think normal sleep is this. I fall asleep at a certain time, say 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and I sleep for 7 to 8 hours, and I wake up 7 to 8 hours later. That's normal sleep. No human being in the world has ever slept like that. That is not normal sleep. Here's normal sleep. You enter stage 1, which is a very light sleep. That's a light sleep that I think 3 of you in here are doing right now. Okay? Okay. Well, that's the one where, I want to sleep. Yeah, just that very light sleep, you don't even think you're sleeping yet. That goes into stage 2, followed by the deep, slow wave sleep. That's where your heart rate falls, your body temperature falls, your blood pressure falls. And that's followed by REM, rapid eye movement sleep, where you do your dreaming, and then you wake up. Stage 1, 2, deep sleep, REM, wake up. Stage 1, 2, deep sleep, REM, wake up all night long. That's normal sleep. When we're young, those wake-ups are a few seconds, and that's when we turn and shift in the bed, and then we're right back into stage 1, and we have amnesia for the wake-up. We don't remember it, and we think we slept all night. When we get older, we wake up, bladder. And now we remember waking up, and we start saying, I'm not sleeping good at night. I'm waking up 3. Now, from the time you enter stage 1 until the time you exit REM is anywhere from 70 to 120 minutes. If you're waking up a little over an hour and to every 2 hours at night, that's normal sleep. As long as you're able to get back to sleep within 15 to 20 minutes. Normal sleep. And it does not need to be medicated. What happens is people start thinking, I'm not sleeping good, I'm waking up all night, I need something to help me sleep. And they start worrying, and then they get ruminating loops about their sleep going, which kick up their amygdala, which kick up their adrenaline, and now they're stressed, and the closer they get to bedtime, they start worrying, I'm not going to be able to sleep, I'm going to be waking up, and they get anxious over their sleep, and that actually keeps them from sleeping. And so in my practice, I've had to educate people on what normal sleep is, and once they go, hey, it's okay to wake up as long as you get back to sleep, I don't have to worry about it, and they have stress and they sleep better. And additionally, people will start sleeping like this, even though it's normal sleep, they will seek to medicate it, and the vast majority of medications on the market for sleep cause memory problems. The family of medicines that are specifically known as sedative hypnotic medicines, the benzodiazepine family of medicines, been 9 studies looking at those medicines and dementia, and 7 of them show a positive correlation between using those and increasing risk of dementia. So I'm not a big fan, especially when it's normal sleep. Eliminate toxins, alcohol, and drugs, that's obvious. TMS, let's talk about TMS. This is transcranial magnetic stimulation. This is my office, and in my office I have one of these machines, and that is an electromagnet that is as strong as an MRI, 2 Tesla magnet, and a person's awake and alert in the chair. There's no IVs, there's no anesthesia, and they have this placed up against their scalp, and during the treatment they get 4 seconds of rapid pulses of magnetic energy, which will cross the cranium and activate their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, remember, is underactive during depression, and and that's showing this actual scan. It's turning on the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And the way your brain is designed or wired, once the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex fires, it activates the anterior cingulate cortex, which is also underactive during depression, reconnecting, activating the salience network, because these send an inhibitory tone down to your amygdala, calming your amygdala. So TMS is moving your brain circuits out of their depressed functional state to their non-depressed functional state. And because they fire them over and over again, that's like exercising them, even though the person isn't firing them, the TMS device, magnetic pulse is firing them. So they turn on the neurotrophins, they get neuronal regrowth going on. And a treatment course, if somebody's in depression, it takes a 37-minute treatment course, which is 4 seconds of pulses and 20 seconds of rest for about 37 minutes, Monday through Friday for 6 weeks to get them out of depression. Once they're out of depression, we have patients in our office now for the last 8 years who've come in once a month for a single treatment once a month, and they haven't relapsed. And you say, well, that's a lot of treatment. These are patients who have failed 15 or 20 antidepressant medicines. So it's approved in the United States since 2008 for people who have failed antidepressant medication. This is available in Australia. And you have plenty of places here in Melbourne. It is not covered by your state health plan, and it's expensive. And then spiritual factors. Newberg and his group took individuals 65 years of age and older and had them meditate 12 minutes a day on a God of love for 30 days. Prior to the meditation, they measured the size of the anterior cingulate cortex, took measures, standardized testing of memory, and heart rate and blood pressure. Heart rate and blood pressure is a measure of stress level or amygdala activation. At the end of 30 days, meditating 12 minutes a day on a God of love, they could measure growth in the anterior cingulate cortex. It was actually larger. And they had lower heart rates and blood pressure because when your love circuits are firing, they turn off your fear circuits. Perfect love, casting out fear neurobiologically. And they had 30% improvement in memory testing within 30 days. They had another group of individuals meditate on an angry God or a punishing God or an authoritarian God or a dictator. None of the benefits came. The benefits came from a God of love. They had another group meditate on nothing, mindfulness, nothing meditation, an empty nothing meditation. And they also showed positive benefit. Not as robust as a God of love, but it was beneficial. So the healthiest worldview a person can have is the belief in the worship of a God of love like Jesus revealed. The next healthiest worldview, though, would be to believe in no God as long as you have a humanistic and altruistic worldview towards other people where you're compassionate and loving towards people. The worst worldview that's most unhealthy for us is to believe in a God that's an authoritarian dictator who is a source of inflicted pain from who we need to be protected. That's the worst view. Altruism, adults who volunteer, after accounting for variables such as education, baseline health, smoking, the volunteers live longer, have less illness, less disability, less depression, less dementia, and stay out of nursing homes longer than those who don't volunteer. This is the putting into practice the principles of love or other-centeredness. So how healthy spirituality helps slow aging and also reduce your risk of depression? It activates your prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, which reconnects your salience network, calming your amygdala, lowering the inflammatory cascades, resulting in better mental and physical health. Tends to reduce anxiety, worry. Notice I said healthy spirituality. You know, there's lots of spiritual pursuits and religious things out there that are not healthy. They're harmful. Did you know there's actually things in Christianity that are harmful? Yes. Not everything done in Christianity is healthy. There's actually very, very harmful things taught and done. But healthy spirituality has this effect. And it will reduce anxiety and worry if it's healthy because you have a God that you love and a God that you trust, and so you can trust Him with outcomes, and so you don't worry about the things that are outside of your control. Healthier lifestyle, generally. People who have healthy spirituality tend to take care of their bodies better than people who don't. So they tend to put less oxidizing and damaging stuff in. They tend to have healthy relationships because they tend to forgive rather than grudge hold. They tend to repent and seek reconciliation overall if it's healthy spirituality. Let me tell you what unhealthy Christianity is. Here's unhealthy Christianity. You're a spouse and your husband is an abuser and beats you up regularly, so you're in a high conflict, high stress situation, and your Christianity tells you that a wife should submit to her husband and stay. and not deal with that issue. That's harmful. That's damaging. That's unhealthy. Do you understand? It's not only harmful to the wife to stay in that circumstance, it's harmful to the husband. Because what's happening to the husband is he's searing his conscience, warping his character, hardening his heart. He is damaging himself and unfitting himself for heaven. And if a wife loves her husband, not just takes responsibility for being the best steward and governance of herself that she has the responsibility of doing, but she loves her husband, she says, I love you too much to stand by quietly while you damage your soul to the point you're irredeemable. No, I'm not putting up with this. Unhealthy spirituality, though, teaches people that they should stay in that abusive relationship longer unless somebody's actually had, physical contact of an inappropriate type outside of the marriage. So in summary, depression is a debilitating illness with damaging changes to brain and body. Antidepressants alone are often inadequate, and I just do want to say here, nothing that I said tonight should be construed to suggest that antidepressants have no place in the treatment of mental health. They do have a very important place in the treatment of mental health. They're just not the panacea, magic bullet, take a pill and everything's wonderful. But for some individuals, antidepressants are truly life-saving for them. Okay? But they're only one piece of a treatment pie. There are various non-drug interventions that can be very helpful in treating depression, and the treatment should be individualized, meaning that we should step back and say, what are the contributing factors in this person's life that have led them to be in this state, and identify as many of those as we can and bring the interventions to bear that will restore health. And now we can do some questions. Do we have a roving mic if there are questions that everybody can hear the question? Oh, that's okay, thank you. So the plan is no questions tonight. Tomorrow we have afternoon. We have a dedicated question and answer time all afternoon tomorrow. So thank you all very much.